Ahlan wa sahlan. Today's episode is going to be the first one in English because I'm going to be interviewing Evelyn Tribole, one of the co-founders of Intuitive Eating. So Evelyn is an award-winning registered dietitian, speaker, and co-creator of Intuitive Eating, one of the 10 books she has authored or co-authored. With over 30 years of experience, she empowers people worldwide to break free from diet culture and embrace food satisfaction and true nourishment. I'm really excited about having the honor of interviewing her, and I hope you will gain a lot from our talk and discussion today. Hello.
Hi. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Too. I'm so happy to see you. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well. Really, really excited to be having this chance to interview you today. And I'm so excited. And it's going to be my first time actually doing something in English. So,
Okay.
well, it's the first time I do something in English for the podcast. So hopefully it might be interesting. Let's see who will be, watching. Will it be my usual or new people? But tell me, how are you doing?
I am doing good. I am surfing more and more and
Yes,
more.
as I
There
can
is a
see.
dietitian in one of my supervision groups who knows you.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So we were singing your praises.
Oh,
So
that's amazing.
yeah.
Oh, I'm so happy. And I've been seeing your surfing. You're doing amazing, honestly. I love when you post the videos, so keep those coming. And I also saw that you have the new workbook.
Thank you. I will be.
Yeah. Okay, good. And the new workbook has come out.
Yeah. It just got released this.
Okay, nice. So the workbook is available in Arabic, and I will put the link for the workbook in Arabic. I think that's the only thing that's been translated into Arabic, actually. So I'll definitely put the link in the show notes.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah. So before we get into the main topics, I wanted to ask you a few questions that have to do with food.
Sure.
So people can get to know the personal side of you. And I think there's nothing better than to ask questions related to food, okay? So since most of our audience are going to be...
yeah, of course.
Yeah, since most of our audience are going to be Arabic speaking or Arabs in general, what's your favorite Middle Eastern food?
Oh my gosh. I love tabbouleh.
Okay.
I love hummus.
Okay.
And oh my God, you know what? There's a lot of Persian foods I love. My most favorite one is fesanjoon. That I will travel for miles to have that.
Okay, yeah. I've never heard of that, since that's Persian, which is different.
Oh
yes, no, don't worry about
my ignorance.
No, there's a lot of Persian food in Kuwaiti food, but not every Persian food, let's say, is made in Kuwaiti households, or other Gulf countries tend to have some Persian food influence, but other Arab countries wouldn't. So because of the Gulf, because we share the same sea, so there is some cultural influence when it comes to the Persian food from Iran. But when it comes to other Arab countries, they wouldn't have Persian food.
What are some of your favorite foods?
Arabic foods?
Yeah. What are your favorite foods?
It's very hard, but definitely the vine leaves. There's a lot of different ones, so it depends on which country. You'll have a different version, but I definitely like the one that's from the Levant. So the way the Lebanese do it, or the Syrians, or the Palestinians, they do it in a certain way, usually with lamb, and that's how I like it. So the stuffed vine leaves, and also the stuffed zucchini. That would be my favorite. Yeah, that's a meal I can never have enough of. Definitely. So you have to try it if you haven't tried it.
Nice.
Okay, another question. Scene that you had to have for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Well, I have to go with my roots. I'm half Mexican, so I'd say Mexican food. But honestly, I also really love Italian. You know what? I just love eating.
Exactly.
and thankfully, we don't have to make those choices.
Yeah, that's true. That's so true. Okay, so last one, and it's a good segue into the main topic, which is what's an overrated food trend, either diet related or not?
Oh my gosh. I'm going to answer that in a very broad stroke. There always seems to be some superfood that comes around and then some supervillain.
Yeah.
And so I would say anytime a food is being elevated as food that's just going to cure everything, be the end all, that becomes really problematic because really what really matters is the pattern of our eating, the totality of our eating, and what food's not going to make or break your health. It can certainly offer some more nutrients, but I think, there's just been way too much marketing and hype around so-called superfoods.
Yeah. So superfoods in general.
Yeah.
So what I've noticed recently is the cottage cheese. I think that was like the latest diet food trend.
Tell me about that. I haven't heard that one.
Oh, really? It's like cottage cheese because cottage cheese has a high percentage of protein. So, they make cottage cheese.
Oh, cottage cheese!
Yeah.
I thought, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's so funny. I remember my mom being into cottage cheese. Like this is like back in the 60s. So I think that's why that put me through cottage cheese really making its comeback.
Yeah, exactly. It has made a big comeback. And you're right. I remember my mom also having it as a diet food when I was a kid.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay. Actually, I just want to mention that I loved the podcast. We Can Do Hard Things.
Oh, We Can Do Hard Things. Yeah.
It was amazing. It was so nice. I really enjoyed it. It's going to be up there with the 10% happier one. One of my faves.
It was such a heartfelt conversation, exactly. And for someone to have been struggling with an eating disorder for most of her life and then to be in recovery, I think it's such a big message of hope. And including the fact how she said she wasn't ready to even talk about intuitive eating until our conversation, basically. And that's, profoundly honest. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And meaning that there's no shame. You're going to be ready when you're going to be ready. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later, but it's never too late. I think that's what the message is, no matter where you are in the recovery world.
Yeah, she's going to be helping a lot of people. All right. So I know you've done this a million times, but if you could just explain what is meant by intuitive eating, okay, for someone who's never heard of it before.
I'll start really broad and then I'll get a little more specific. So we can, there's many ways to define intuitive eating, but it's a self-care eating framework that's rooted in the compassion for all bodies. And what that really means is that you're the expert of your experiences. There are 10 principles, not rules, 10 principles or guideposts. There is also an intuitive eating assessment scale. In fact, a brand new one just got published. And there's almost 300 studies to date on intuitive eating, really showing a lot of benefits. So it's actually really, really exciting. And if we start getting into this, there's a lot of myths around intuitive eating. Some people, have the mistaken belief that it's just about eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. And it's like, okay, there's 2 principles that have to do around hunger and fullness, but it's not this precise pass or go. If you end up getting too hungry, in other words, you don't honor your hunger when you first experience it, not a problem. It's just that your hunger is going to be more intense and more urgent. And if you eat past comfortable fullness, again, not a problem. It might just mean that you're not going to be very hungry at your next meal or at the time that when you ordinarily ate. Exactly. And I think one of the most well, actually, let me restate this. So one of the unifying principles of intuitive eating, or the hub of intuitive eating, is aiming for satisfaction when you eat. And I often like to start there because it's such a personal experience, and it's really pleasure-based if you think about it. Ultimately, it's not pleasurable to, undereat. It's not pleasant to eat past comfortable fullness. And so the question becomes, what is satisfaction for you? What kind of foods, what kind of conditions, how do you want to feel when you finish eating? There's all kinds of stuff. And it's been amazing to me over all these years, the amount of people I've worked with that really have no idea. And it makes sense. I'll say, it makes a lot of sense, because if you've been dieting all your life, by whatever name you call it, lifestyle change, keto lifestyle, there's so many names now, but following some kind of food plan, it's outsourcing your eating experiences to somebody else and it's outside, it's external. So you don't get to know your preferences or what truly satisfies. It's all about the rules, and that's how trust starts to get disrupted. And it's one of the biggest feedbacks I get from readers, that they think, intuitive eating is a beautiful model. It's great for other people,
Yeah.
but they don't trust that it works for their body. And so one of the things I like to look at, well, let's look at how trust got undermined in your life. Every time you go on some kind of restricted food plan for the purpose of trying to change your body weight, every time you try and trick out hunger, every time you try and trick out fullness, that contributes to disruption of this trust. But the good news is trust can be rebuilt. It can be repaired, every time you honor hunger. So there's many ways to get down this path. And one of the things I like to say about intuitive eating is a pathway out of suffering. Diet culture is a root of suffering for a lot of people. And so there's a way out of it. You don't have to live in this way.
But the hard thing is that before they build that trust, they need to trust the process, or trust that they'll get there. Right? And that's where I come in.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. That's where you come in. Absolutely. Yeah. And I was going to say that, I would also say the more complex someone's history,
that's true.
If you have trauma in your history, or you have an eating disorder in your history, you've got an anxiety disorder, other kinds of things, it's still workable. But what it might mean is you would benefit from working with somebody who's been trained in intuitive eating, such as yourself, in terms of helping and support you in the process.
And also, the more you are closer to a straight-sized body, the easier it is because the pressure is more internal than external.
That is so true. The research also bears that out as well on many levels. When you have a body that conforms to the social norm, you're not questioning as much your eating choices or your fullness and hungers and those kinds of things. But when you've been in a body that's deemed too big, and especially if it's been happening since you were a little child, then you've been sold the message that you can't be trusted with your appetite, you can't be trusted with your body. And so there's a lot of healing and a lot of repair that needs to be done. And this is where I like to say is a great message for parents. Parents are doing the best they can, but sometimes well-meaning parents end up putting so much focus on their kids eating and on their body that it ends up disrupting this trust and creating more problems. On the other hand, if parents trust their own bodies, trust their appetites, that can also get fostered down to their kids as well. So one of the things I love to say is, wouldn't it be wonderful to end the legacy of diet culture at your own kitchen table? To try and end the whole legacy of culture globally is so daunting. But the idea that, well, in my home, we're not going to disparage bodies. We're not going to disparage food. That can be a wonderful, wonderful beginning.
Definitely. And gives us the hope we need. Who would benefit the most, or who is intuitive eating for?
What a great question. When we originally wrote intuitive eating, we can say it was really research inspired. It was based on our experiences working with a lot of people, mainly women, who were suffering at the hands of dieting and feeling like they were utter failures. And what we like to say is, what has failed you is not you. It is the whole system of dieting. That's the real problem. And so we reviewed and did a big analysis of the research, factored in our clinical experience, also what was going on in just mainstream books. And one of the researchers that really influenced our work, and I am going to answer your question, was L.L. Birch. And she was somebody who was an expert in the parent-child feeding relationship. And she's the one that has shown that, when a well-meaning parent restricts their kids' eating, they create the opposite effect. They end up developing an obsession for the foods that they can't have. They'll go out and sneak the foods, and they end up being more dysregulated and disconnected to their bodies. And so while we aimed the intuitive eater at the general kind of chronic dieter, a lot of the research is really based on kids. And what's happening now in the research world, which is so exciting, it's really being viewed as, quote, an adaptive model of eating. In other words, it's a psychologically healthy way to go for your physical and mental well-being. So it really can be for anybody. And then where it gets complex, if somebody has conditions, it might just mean you need some more support or scaffolding to integrate intuitive eating in your particular situation.
Okay.
Like if you have an eating disorder, for example.
All right. And when you were working on it, or all those years as you adapted it and had different editions of the book, was there anything that changed about your eating?
Oh, what a great question. Yes and no. I've never talked about this, and it's something at some point I will talk more in detail about. But as a dietitian, with a master's degree in nutrition science, or sometimes I call it a master's degree in diet culture, I did get some really good training, though. In the beginning, I was part of diet culture.
Yeah.
I used to write a column for Shape magazine. It's a national women's magazine in the United States. That was about how to make your recipes healthier. And so readers would send in their favorite recipes, and I would tinker around with them and either made them lower in calories or something. I was always trying to improve upon that. And it was something I was doing in my everyday life. I no longer do that anymore. My first question is, how's it going to be the most tasty and the most satisfying? And I go with that. So that's how I have changed. I had to unlearn some of the diet culture that I was taught with. And at the same time, no shame to anyone who does modify some of the recipes. I think there's that fine balance, where, maybe we can make something incredibly tasty, just as good.
Yeah.
But how often is that really the case where it's just as good, So that's something that has changed for me. And who had a big influence on my career was Julia Child, a very famous chef in the United States. I think she was known globally. And I was on one of her task force, a bunch of nutritionists and dietitians and a bunch of chefs. Can we all get along? Let's find a common message. And we would meet monthly. We'd also go out, and I loved eating with chefs, because what chefs do when they eat out as a group, they all order a different entree, and when it comes, you take a couple of bites and you pass the plate down, and so you get exposed to so many different kinds of foods, and even things that I wouldn't have again. Like I remember eating cilantro ice cream.
Oh wow!
And I love cilantro, but with ice cream, I don't think those two go together. But so, anyways, what it did, it really exposed my palate to the food world, and what the message ended up being as a result of our meetings and so on is to the nutritionists of the world, please consider taste when you're factoring in any kind of nutrition guidelines, and to the chefs of the world, can you factor in a little bit of nutrition? So in other words, it's kind of finding the middle way. That's what we were actually looking at. So with those experiences, that's how I have changed. No one's ever asked me that question. Excellent question.
Okay, thank you. I came across this quote or this saying, and it really made me realize how much it applies to what we do, or our work, or your work, or diet culture in general, which is, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled.
Oh my gosh. I love that quote.
Know, isn't it amazing? Even though it came up because it was something about the moon landing is fake. But what statistics do you use? And I know you like your numbers. What statistics would you use for skeptics?
So there's a lot of ways that I like to go. So if we get really into the juicy details, I like to get into the weight science research. And that is when you start looking at all these weight loss studies, if you start looking at the longer term effects, which is seldomly done. Usually the studies are too short to capture the long-term effects or the unintended consequences. And one of the biggest ones we see is that by year 5, up to 2/3 of people have gained back not just all the weight that they lost, but they gained back more. And now there's even a term for it called weight cycling, when you keep gaining and losing the same weight and it escalates upward. And what we're seeing now with weight cycling research, there really is a very strong link with illness and death, morbidity, mortality. It's linked with, blood sugar dysregulation. So in other words, going on a diet for the sake of losing weight is not without its harm. It increases the risk for eating disorders. It's just really profound when we look at the body of research. And it kind of goes back to that quote that a lot of people are in disbelief about that. And, one of the things I've been doing lately, getting ready for another book, I've been doing a deep dive into famine research because I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. And, I just looked at the last 100 years, and every decade there has been really significant famines. And when you start looking at what the impact of that is in terms of epigenetics, meaning a woman who is pregnant, that baby's going to be impacted. You might not see the impact upon birth, but when that baby becomes an adult, we see more chronic diseases. We see higher weights. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's a natural compensatory response. We see higher cortisol levels. And so my opinion is that with all of this push to eat less, lose weight, we are creating an intentional famine. Because it's interesting when you start taking a look at what the definition of famine is. There's not a universal definition, but if you look at the famous Dutch famine that took place during, World War II, the women were eating somewhere between 900 and 1,400 calories, and we still see this impact. And I keep thinking about the people I have worked with who eat like that or even a lot less, that maybe what's really happening is all of these weight loss policies are actually perpetuating the problem they say that they're trying to solve,
Exactly.
And when we step back and look at all of the factors that impact health, social determinants of health, where you live, access to water, access to health care. Then there's the commercial determinants of health, which is really a huge issue in the United States, and it has to do with profit over people. And so, big pharma like drug companies, now we see, with the GLP-1s, the lobbyists that they have, all these kinds of things, even diet programs. If people weren't making money off of that, it wouldn't be as popular of a thing to do. Would it still be an issue? Probably, but not as popular with that motive. And so there's this perception that, well, if I just do it better, if I just stick on the diet longer, when actually it's not sustainable. And it's a phenomenon I'm seeing with my patients where I'm getting their history and they'll talk about, oh yeah, that diet program really worked. And they really believe it. And what I have seen over and over again is they are referring to the short amount of time when they first started the diet. No one is questioning that you can lose weight temporarily. But the key word is temporary. And without, consequences. Then what ends up happening, something happens where they're no longer on this diet, but they blame themselves. Well, I went on the vacation. I was really stressed out. If I just do it harder and longer, but I'll say, no, you're not the problem. It is the system that is the particular problem. So those are the things that I like to look at. And, it really depends who I'm talking to, who my audience is. If I'm talking to a group of health professionals versus one-on-one with a patient, I can get I am very passionate about this topic and the harm and the suffering that I have seen. And yet when I'm working one-on-one, I want it to be a conversation. And if I come off as this righteous know-it-all around the research, that's not going to help the individual. So I'm looking at, can we look at what the impact has been on their life? Right? In terms of having the belief system that they need to be in a smaller body or having an attachment to being in a smaller body. What is the cost been to you? How's that impacted your relationships? How has that impacted yourself, in terms of your thought process, your well-being, and all these other kinds of things? And there's all kinds of issues that end up happening as a result of being really entrenched in diet culture. And so it's starting to look at that. And what I like to say, there is no shame that you've been in diet culture, because it is the water that we are swimming in. It has been around for a really, really long time. So of course you get caught up on that. And of course, even if intuitive eating sounds really appealing because you're sick of the suffering, you might still have a foot into diet culture. And what I say is that's completely okay. It's so unusual to not have thoughts and desires about being in a smaller body. I say all are welcome, but what we want to keep the focus is connection to the self, connection to what is happening. And I sometimes call it to the text messages of your body. And one of the underlying mechanisms of intuitive eating is something called, and I know that you know this, interoceptive awareness. And that's our ability to perceive physical sensations that arise within the body. And it's like, well, what's the big deal? Well, it includes states, like having a full bladder.
Mhm.
It includes hunger and satiety, but it also includes emotion. Every emotion has a physical sensation.
Mhm.
And all of these sensations are really about getting you back into balance, whether it's biological
Mhm.
balance or whether it's psychological balance. But if you're at war with your body, you don't trust your body, you might not, want to have anything to do with the messages. You totally
Mhm.
might disregard them because of the mistrust and so on. And yet,
Mhm.
is a powerful, powerful tool,
Exactly.
incredibly powerful.
And like you said before, if we harness it, and as mothers, especially that many of the people listening would be female, are there or mothers to be in the future, or aunts or big sisters or whatever, they can help the rest of the family, protect that because it's there. Just let's protect it from diet culture so that we
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
preserve it. Something that I've noticed is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
diet culture and beauty culture, let's say, or beauty business or whatever it's called,
Ah, yeah.
are very much linked. And then you have it also in healthcare. But what I found that
Absolutely.
some women can, decide that they're not going to color their hair and let their gray come out, or they're not going to have like fillers or Botox or whatever, and they're fine with their wrinkles, or don't want to put makeup on, and they are able to make that decision and not let that affect them. But when it comes to being in a smaller body or accepting their natural weight, it's so hard. Even when they've like rejected the influence
You
of
know, it's
that.
it's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in part, and this is, in part, I think it's because smaller bodies have been conflated with health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Beauty, we know, not attached to health. So that I think it's a little easier to separate, not easy, but easier.
that's true.
But when someone really believes, no, 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 I'm doing it for my
Mm-hmm.
health, it's understandable why that's so hard to separate that out. And on a psychological level, on a sociological level, it's showing somebody how good I am.
Mm-hmm.
Look at my virtue,
Yeah.
because I'm eating in a certain way and I have this particular kind of body.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that can feel at stake, for an individual. And so what I like to say is, when we look at health, we have to look at the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Psychological health and well-being is just as important as physical health. It's the same coin, just different sides. And we know that the pursuit of weight loss through dieting, food restriction and
Mm-hmm.
so on has a huge impact on mental health. And also we're seeing it on physical health as well. And the thing that just drives me bonkers is, actually, this just happened. There was a study published looking at weight cycling, and it was a review, and the results were really puzzling. And so someone asked to take a look at it, and I looked at it and I go, oh my God, half of the studies were so small. There were like 10 people or less. The duration of the studies were under a year. In other words, they weren't capturing weight cycling from a statistical standpoint and also for the duration. And I don't expect the average consumer to know that, oh, that study it wasn't done long enough, and
Exactly.
the journalists of the world would hopefully be dissecting that, but they're not. We see that right now with the GLP-1s, that they are being so touted as this panacea, and often in mainstream media like the New York Times, they are not criticizing or looking at alternative viewpoints in terms of the downsides and downsides rather, and the harms that can end up happening. And so once again, then it's understandable that someone would have the belief, no, no, I'm doing this for my health. I
Yeah.
don't want to be. I've had people say, I don't want to be skinny. I just want to be healthy.
Healthy.
I want to have my energy back. I want to be strong. And I'm like, ooh, we can work on that. We can work on strength. We can work on energy without ever having to focus on weight. And we have to remember that weight is not a behavior. Weight is not a behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
And that body diversity is real. When I'm working with teens and younger kids, I'll say, if you take a look at dogs, or let's look at puppies. If you took a look at a little look at a little Chihuahua or an Italian Whippet, very tiny, versus a big bulldog or mastiff, they're all lovable. they are just different sizes. It's
Mm-hmm.
not wrong. And the same thing in our culture as well. Body diversity is a thing, which is why it's important that we also learn from people with the lived experiences in larger bodies. They've been saying, we've been telling this for a long time,
Yep.
that diets don't work. They
Exactly.
create problems. And, one of my biggest concerns now with the restriction, I'm going back into the kind of related back to the famine.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at some other areas, we know, from the International Limit Committee just issued recently, about a year ago, this really profound paper saying, we've known about relative energy deficiency syndrome, also known as REDS, REDS. And this paper was especially compelling because of the graphics that came along and some more data. And they said, when you're not getting enough to eat, you don't have to have an eating disorder, but you can be eating inadequate, and to the point that it affects every health system in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it affects your performance. And they added really strong language and said, and especially if this low intake is accompanied with a low carbohydrate eating,
Oh,
it
wow.
actually amplifies the problems. And as I'm reading all of this, I'm thinking, this is no different than the patients I work with who exercise a lot. They train like athletes. Okay, so we hold on to that for a moment. Then we go to the field of eating disorders and we look at the issue of atypical anorexia, which is basically anorexia nervosa, but somebody with a larger body.
Yeah.
And there's been tons of research coming out now showing that the health consequences are just as dire. It's just as dangerous. There's a big move to naming the diagnosis something else. So my point is, what this has in common is under eating creates problems no matter the size of your body. And so my concern is with the GLP-1s and this pursuit of thinness is going to create problems. And these kind of problems don't happen right now. They happen, long term. We don't see the bones hollowing out from osteoporosis from the under eating and all these other kinds of things that can end up happening. But, one of the things I'll tell my patients, one of the things you can look at that's pretty accessible is if you see your hair falling out more than normal, that's a sign of under eating. Those are some things that we can be looking at. So there's some real harms that happen. And then, the other thing, I know you've seen this, is the obsessionality that ends up happening with under eating. We see this in eating disorders. We've seen this in a lot of research studies. And there's this focus on eating and this incessant chatter about eating. It blows my mind that you can be at like an amazing traditional gathering or celebration and someone is turning down a dish and they're saying because, and they're naming their diet. It's like, why don't you just say no, thank you? I don't need to hear about, your diet. And it ends up hijacking the conversation. Exactly. And the person is often completely unaware because there's this, I say this really carefully. There's this profound amount of self-absorption that happens when you're under eating. And part of it's a survival mechanism. You're constantly thinking about food and chattering about food, even if you're not eating it. Yeah. And that's a survival mechanism. We're wired to survive famine, but that has an impact on relationships, So if you're having a meal with your family or with loved ones, but you're preoccupied with that diet that you're on, what that means is that you're not really in connection with that individual. You're in your mind, and that can be problematic. That's part of the cost of diet culture.
Yep. I remember those days very well. I'm not going to go back there. Okay, so you touched upon several things that I actually have as notes when it comes to certain criticisms or issues that people would have as reasons not to start or afraid of quitting diet culture. And one of them is, what do you mean all food is equal? How can I have like fried food and eat sugar and still be healthy?
Yeah, what a great question. I get that a lot. And let me add another one to it since we're going to talk about this. And that is, if I allowed myself to eat whatever I want, I would never stop. I would never stop eating the chocolate. I would never stop eating the pasta. And my response is that usually reflects the amount of deprivation someone's had, that they can't even imagine that they would get tired of having it at every single meal or every single day. And so
Yeah.
that's a fear. And I would say that's a real understandable fear. And then if we factor in social media, people get really excited. And what we're talking about is the principle of make peace with food, and that you can have whatever food you want to. And so you see these beautiful posts, colorful donuts, colorful cupcakes, and woohoo, I get to eat these things. It's not a big deal anymore. It used to be an obsession of mine. And so people see that, and sometimes they think, well, that's what intuitive eating is this big food free-for-all. And you can eat that way if you want to. But what ends up happening is this paradox. When you finally truly have unconditional permission to eat, you get to ask, do I really want this food? If I have it now, am I going to enjoy it? As opposed to, let's get it now before I change my mind. Let's hurry up and eat it before the guilt comes in. And the other thing we end up seeing is this phenomenon we call the Last Supper effect, that when someone is about to embark on some kind of eating plan, they go through this, say farewell to food feast because they really believe they're never going to have it again. And so you end up getting this complete dysregulation. And so making peace with food is about removing the morality from eating. And when you have this emotional freedom, it's amazing what can end up happening, all different kinds of things. It surprises people, and it delights me to see this. And so, in the criticism or the fear that, oh my gosh, people eat whatever they want, they're going to be unhealthy, they're not going to be nourished properly. And yet there's research now that has come out showing that's not what happens. There was a study reviewing 14 different studies, intervention studies, using either intuitive eating or a similar kind of model. And what they found across the board is that either the quality of their eating improved or the quality didn't change, meaning it didn't get worse in terms of the fear mongering. Oh my God, if you do this, it's going to get worse. It's going to be a disaster. And that's not what we see happening. In fact, intuitive eaters tend to even eat more fruits and vegetables. They tend to have a wider variety of foods that they eat. So, it's about having complete freedom. But you're right, it takes this leap of faith. We talked about trust earlier. And so sometimes it is this jump, and so sometimes people will get to the point where they're just so miserable that they just can't continue living the way that they're living, and that they're willing to go through the emotional discomfort of trying something new. And, if one of your listeners out there is thinking, oh my God, that is me. There's no way I could do this. I want to, but there's no way. Then I'd say, it might be helpful to work with somebody who's been trained and certified in intuitive eating to kind of help facilitate it. Because sometimes what's also happening, we don't go through this in a vacuum. And I've had people who are still restricting their eating and want to make peace with food. You can do that, but the problem is when you're not getting enough to eat consistently or in a timely manner, you're going to have a powerful hunger drive that's going to drive that eating. One example I love to use, let's say, you're busy working a full-time job. You have an early lunch because you have a meeting. Let's say you eat at 11, then you work out after dinner, but oh wait, you got pulled into another meeting. So you not work out after dinner. You were going to work out after work, but you got pulled into a meeting. So long story short, by the time you get home, 8 o'clock. And now it's been 9 hours since you last ate. And if you had decided you're going to make peace with some food, you're going to be in that place of primal hunger. And the intensity and the urge is going to be so high because of hunger, not because of the food that you're eating. And that might scare you. So that's why I'd want to, let's make sure you're getting, for the most part, you don't have to be perfect, but, a sufficient amount of food, enough carbs, enough energy, and not going too long without eating those kinds of foods. So that's where this can feel kind of complex. And so I'd like to emphasize, intuitive eating is not one principle. It's a dynamic interplay of 10 principles,
Excellent. Okay. And then the other argument, let's say, is, but I have an illness that requires weight loss, or my doctor says that I need to lose weight because of my XYZ.
Yeah, so I hear that one a lot. And so here's where I really unpack this. So if it's a patient, one of the first things I'm going to ask is, how does it feel to hear conflicting information? I want to address the relationship part first. And often my patients say, it really stresses me out. I believe what you're saying. I also believe my doctor. I don't know what to do. Or they'll say, yeah, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but I'm afraid my doctor's going to get mad at me because I'm not, doing what they said. And so one of the things I like to emphasize is that a doctor cannot be an expert in all things. I mean, if you think about all the things physicians need to know, including COVID, now they need to know how to manage COVID and all the new drugs that are coming around to, work with that. And so when it comes to weight, they follow the recommendations of their institutions. Like in America, it's the American Medical Association, which has a policy of, weight loss. And what's interesting, if you look at that one specific institution, back in 2013, that American Medical Association asked their scientific committee to evaluate the question, can we call obesity a disease? And their conclusion after reviewing the research was, no, we don't have enough data to support that idea. And the powers that be did not like it. And so what they did is they decided to hold it to a vote. And they got outvoted. The scientific committee got outvoted. So that's an example of politics. It's an example of money, the influence of drug companies, and so on. And so that's what I say, that if you're interested in health, there are many more ways that we can do this. And if your doctor is truly, interested in your health, why would you be prescribing something that's not sustainable and causes harm and predicts actually the opposite, that you're going to actually gain more weight from the research? And sometimes what I'll do with the individual, let's look at your own history. I've been talking about all these studies, but let's look at your history. What's going on with you? And what we usually see is like, oh, exactly what we see in the history. It's not sustainable. So that's what I do. And then I will get involved with their consent. I will talk to the physician and see if we can come to some agreement that, we can focus on healthy behaviors that are sustainable and don't cause harm. We can look at sleep. We can look at activity. We can look at all different kinds of things without focusing on weight. And, the interesting thing is that when someone starts to go on some kind of diet or plan, that increases the stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol has been linked to a lot of chronic diseases, So there's so much there, but it's this cultural belief system, and which is why I sometimes look to psychology and sociology research to explain. It would dumbfound me. There's all this research, and why is this happening? And there's this phenomenon called the Semmelweis reflex, which is named after the doctor who discovered hand washing can save lives back in the 17th century. He did a small study showing if you washed your hands, you would prevent death from these women that were dying. And at that time, when he presented the data, he was basically laughed out of medicine. And the doctors were saying, we're physicians, we're gentlemen, we don't need to wash our hands. And it was a time when surgeons were proud to wear their bloody garments because it showed that I'm a surgeon. And so this phenomenon is about when new data come along that refutes the popular paradigm, it is met with disdain and incredulity. And we have seen this we've seen it in science. Like if you go back to Galileo, who popularized, that the earth is not the center of the universe. And he was put under house arrest for heresy. And we see this throughout science. And even the more recent example is with gastric ulcers. The two doctors discovered that it was a bacteria causing it at a time when patients were told to change their lifestyle, and many times they got part of their stomach removed because of the ulcers. And they presented research, they were ignored, and finally one of the doctors was so tired of it, he cultivated the bacteria, gave it to himself, and created the ulcer. Improved. This ulcer, this bacteria H. pylori causes the ulcer. So fast forward in the early 2000s, they received the Nobel Prize in medicine. So if we look at it from that standpoint, from a historical standpoint, and the Semmelweis reflex, it's like, oh, this is following, what we see when there's been kind of a belief system. And then if we get really deep into it, down the sociology path and history path, with the work of Sabrina Strings, she wrote the book, The Racial Roots of Fat Phobia, Fearing the Black Body, showing that weight in the beginning was never about health. It was about hierarchy and so on, and tied to racism and tied to conformity and all these other kinds. So complex, so complex.
And then you have people who use, they hijack intuitive eating and say, I can help you lose weight when you follow the intuitive eating principles. And then people even, want to work with me thinking that I can help them lose weight by following intuitive eating, because they can't go on another diet. They're diet fatigue or whatever you want to call it. And they just can't go on another diet. So maybe this will help me lose weight. And then I have to explain that, well, maybe, but also maybe not. And I tell them it's okay that deep down you still want to lose weight. And, that's what they say. And even the ones that have accepted that it might not lead to weight loss, but there's still this desire. It's still there. So what message would you have for them?
Yeah, so one of the things I like to say is, actually there's several things I like to say, and that the whole point of intuitive eating, the framework, is about cultivating a healthy relationship with mind and body and eating. It's not about changing the body. And that one of three things can happen from a body standpoint. Your body can stay the same, weight can go up, or weight can go down. And then I've had patients say, the ones who've read the book, they'll say, well, I secretly hope I'm the one that, has weight loss. And then my response is, but what if that's not the story of your body? And I would hate to see you assess the effectiveness of intuitive eating based on weight loss. And so, because intuitive eating has gotten so popular, it really has. So it's like good news and then like careful news. And that is, social media has, there's been diet companies that have co-opted the language of intuitive eating. Social media has. And so I even have this post. It's one of my most popular posts. And every once in a while I update it. And it's called How to Spot Fake Intuitive Eating. And so if someone is promising weight loss with intuitive eating, I say run away. They don't know what they're talking about. They have not been trained in our model. It's a big, big problem. And again, what someone's body does, it's going to do. And intuitive eating is not about that. And so, one of the things I'll also say for the person who says, I want to lose weight, and I'll say, but what if that, not only is that not your body's story, but even if your body was to lose some weight, how would it feel that I'm not going to be sitting there celebrating that? I'm celebrating your connection to your body. I'm celebrating your connection to getting your needs met and so on. And, from a cultural standpoint, if you think about it, I don't know how often it happens in Kuwait, but in the United States, giving compliments about weight loss. Oh my God, you look so good. You've lost weight.
Oh yeah. I bet it's even more
that
over
continues. Yeah, it's just awful. And people don't. I actually got into a really interesting discussion with a family member on this. And I said, you're perpetuating diet culture when you say, what? It's like, oh, come on, Evelyn, you're just getting too, I go, no, I have seen so much suffering because you never know what you're complimenting. That person could have an eating disorder. They could have had a miscarriage. They could have depression. And especially if they've been, in the throes of an eating disorder, then mentally they're thinking, oh my God, I'm getting complimented and I'm eating, basically nothing. So it becomes a problem. And so I'll say, I understand the intention, but could we look at complementing other things that are within the person's, control? Gosh, I just love how connected you are every time that we talk. God, I just love how I get your full undivided attention, whatever it happens to be. So again, it's not about shaming people for making those kind of compliments, but it's shining the light of awareness that this is perpetuating the diet culture cycle. And so that one way that we can help to stop the perpetuation of that is to stop by giving compliments based on weight and looking other ways we can compliment people if you're looking to do a compliment.
100%. And you mentioned GLP-1s, and again, I don't know if it's just as much in the US, maybe in California, yes, but over here in Kuwait, I think like anyone who's dieting is taking it. It's like to that extent, almost like you keep hearing this, like this joke now, where it's like someone who's always been in a bigger body, all of a sudden now has lost weight when they've never been able to lose weight, let's say in the past. Some people admit it, some people, keep it as a secret. But what would be the long-term psychological and physiological impact of using weight loss injections? Here, Mounjaro is like the big
What a great question. It's really popular in the United States. And the thing that I'm so concerned about, and it's not just me, a lot of people are, is the long-term data don't exist yet. What are the long-term impacts on your pancreas, on your thyroid? For those that get, the gastric problems, the nausea, the throwing up, the gastric paresis. Gastric paresis is basically the paralysis of the stomach or of the gut. And that is a huge, huge problem. It affects the absorption of any medications you're on. It affects the absorption of nutrients. If you have surgery, you have to even withhold food for even longer before undergoing the surgery. A lot of people don't tolerate the drug. And so what if you're the ones that don't tolerate, you have to get off of it? What if you have to get off of it because you are pregnant or there's something else medically going on where it's contraindicated? And in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Kuwait, but it's a health insurance issue. Most health insurance doesn't cover it. And, what happens? Can you afford this for the rest of your life? Here in the United States, on average, it's $1,000 US every month. And that's a huge amount of money to be spending on something in which we don't know what the long-term implications are. And then going back to what I was saying earlier in terms of the famine research, what is this doing? Because, and I'd love to see a study. I haven't seen it yet. If it exists, I don't think it has existed yet. But looking at the nutritional intake of people on these medications. And from case study reports, what it really appears to me is like there's a celebration of malnutrition. And why are we celebrating malnutrition? And if you're concerned about health, why is that okay? Why is it okay that you're engaging in something that might cause osteoporosis or cause damage to your organs and these kinds of things? And so though I have more questions than I do answers. And one of the things I take care in doing, if someone has made that decision or they've been pressured into it by their physician, I'm not going to shame them, for their decision. I want to help them. And one of the ways I like to do that is, first of all, find out, did they have complete informed consent? Are you familiar with all the different kinds of side effects that can end up happening, including the weight cycling and all these other kinds of things? And, they'll often say, well, I want to become an intuitive eater, but now you're on this medication and your hunger cues are blunted. And so often what that means is we're working on nourishment as self-care. Let's make sure you're getting, enough to eat and so on. So I don't have the answers, but if we look to the past, like fen-phen was really, really popular, although I don't remember getting this much uncritical support the way it is with this particular class of medications, but eventually it was pulled off the market because of all the harm that it was causing. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen on that one.
Well, I feel actually for women after a certain age where it becomes harder to lose weight. And now this is a way where they can lose weight, but they're at an age where you don't want to lose muscle.
Well, and that's actually, you bring a really good point. And that is, if you're not getting enough to eat, you're going to lose muscle, no matter what they say. And people say, oh, eat more protein. Well, guess what? If you're not getting enough calories in, that protein that you're eating is going to get used as a calorie source. It's like using, if you use wood, or wood fire to heat up your place. Although a lot of people don't do that anymore. But let's say you ran out of wood, so now you're taking your kitchen cabinet and deconstructing it to burn that for heat. That's what's happening with protein. You can eat tons of protein, but if you're not doing it with enough calories, it does not spare the muscle. You still lose a lot of muscle mass. And at any age, you really don't want to be losing muscle mass. Wow. And it concerns me the way some of these drugs are being promoted, like Jumpstart Your Weight Loss Journey. And it's like that drug was never intended for that reason. So what it does, it throws the person under the bus that you must be doing something wrong. And there are some people, by the way, who don't lose weight on this medication. And one of the people I like to follow on Substack is Reagan Chastain. She's a fat activist that deconstructs a lot of this research, including looking at all the players. In terms of related kinds of research and who they're funded by, it's really kind of fascinating. So it's complex. It's incredibly complex. And I think in the long term, we're going to see big problems with this. And I wonder, based on famine research, if we're going to end up, again, perpetuating the famine response epigenetically, in which we see it in the next generations and the grandkids in terms of more chronic diseases and, quote, difficulty losing weight because the body knows how to survive a famine. Metabolic rate slows down. There's all these things that end up happening. And so I think it's going to be a big old mess. It is a mess, actually. Yeah.
It's a mess, but it's also going to be fascinating to read. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so last question, from your experience, what do you find helps clients the most, and what would stand in their way in becoming intuitive eaters?
Oh, gosh. There's so many different ways of looking at this. What helps most is this willingness and this idea that this is not pass or fail. It's a journey, and only you can be the expert of you. I find that is really helpful. Only you know your thoughts, your feelings, your needs. No one, including me, can tell you what those are. I might facilitate some things, but only you know. And that becomes really powerful as you get connected to your body, interoceptive awareness. I think part of the reason people say that intuitive eating is life-changing is because of that. They feel so much more grounded in their decision-making that pours out into other areas in their life. I've been contacted by artists who say their art has come back because the brain space is not being used with all of this noise of diet culture and so on. And in terms of obstacles, one of the biggest obstacles I've seen have been people who are in families who are being pressured to lose weight under the guise of, I just want you to be happy and healthy. And so when there's a lot of fat phobia in the immediate family, especially, I find that that's really challenging. Or if they're in a relationship with somebody who is, it's workable, but it makes it really, really challenging. So yeah, we're living in challenging times, and that's an understatement.
And do you think with the popularity of intuitive eating, things would be getting easier, but it's just as challenging because diet culture keeps getting stronger and finding new ways.
Yeah. But what gives me hope is people like you, people from around the world that are getting trained and certified in intuitive eating. We're now in 64 countries. There's over 2,600 certified intuitive eating counselors, including yourself. So that gives me hope, because what happens, we're the ones sitting in the trenches. We are witnessing the suffering. Those researchers aren't, because they stopped the study, or they're not meeting with the patients or the client or the subjects, every week like we are every other week. And so when we see this, we know. We are a witness to the suffering, and we want to be the antidote to the suffering. You don't have to live in this way.
Exactly. Evelyn, as always a pleasure to talk to you. I learned so much from you, and I love your energy. Thank you so much for your time and all the work that you do.
Thank you.
And I have to tell you, when I was listening the other day I listened again to 10% Happier. And when I listened to it the first time, I remember like the first 10, 15 minutes, because whenever I send it to someone to listen to, I'm like, the first 10, 15 minutes, they're talking about meditation. Skip it. Okay. Skip it until you get to the part about intuitive eating. But when I listened to it again, it was different for me, because I got into meditation. So like 2 years later, I was listening to it. And because I did the instructor training with Jenna Hollenstein. You know her?
Oh, yes. Very nice. Yeah, I do. Very much. Yes.
I did that. So I'm using it with my clients, and I now have a meditation, let's say, practice. Not much, but still, it was different listening to it later on, It made much more sense.
Well, it goes to show, readiness. We have to be ready to hear a message. Exactly. And sometimes we're not ready, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You came back to it. That's what counts. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. 100%. So thank you so much. And anything you'd want to say at the end?
Well, I guess if people are looking for more information, they can follow me on Instagram or our website. And I know you also have a lot of really good resources. So you don't have to be suffering all your details. There's a way out.
All your details will be in the show notes, whether it's someone who wants to get the books or follow Evelyn on Instagram, or even wants to be an intuitive eating counselor. So please, we need more of us.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't even think about that. You're right. Yeah. Thank you so much. I very much enjoyed the conversation.
Evelyn, and have an amazing day. Thank you so much. I always enjoy my talks with Evelyn. I've actually met her in person. She's an amazing human being. I really appreciate all the work she has done, her and her partner, Elise Rush. So thank you so much, Evelyn. And as I mentioned, I'll put all her details in the show notes. And please like, subscribe, share this if you found it useful. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.